2000, George W. Bush versus Al Gore. The 2000 presidential election took place during a period of economic prosperity, but it revealed deep disagreements about the nation's direction. Vice President Al Gore, running with Joe Lieberman, emphasized fiscal discipline by protecting the budget surplus, expanding Medicare and Social Security, and investing in healthcare and environmental policy. Gore championed aggressive action on climate change, renewable energy, and stricter environmental regulations. He favored targeted tax credits rather than broad tax cuts and framed his agenda as long-term stewardship of the economy and planet. Texas Governor George W. Bush, with running mate Dick Cheney, promoted compassionate conservatism, combining traditional Republican tax cuts with an emphasis on education reform, faith-based community programs, and a more humble foreign policy. Bush pushed for large across-the-board tax reductions, arguing that Americans deserve to share in the surplus. He highlighted the need for stronger school accountability, laying the groundwork for No Child Left Behind, and drew strong support from religious conservatives and suburban moderates. Issues like globalization, trade, and the cultural divide between urban and rural America simmered beneath the surface. The election ended in one of the closest contests in U.S. history, and after a disputed Florida recount and the Supreme Court ruling Bush versus Gore, George W. Bush won the presidency. 2004, George W. Bush versus John Kerry. The 2004 presidential election unfolded in the shadow of the September 11th attacks and the ongoing wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, making national security the defining issue of the race. Incumbent President George W. Bush, with Vice President Dick Cheney, framed the election as a choice between steadfast leadership in the war on terror and what he portrayed as uncertain alternatives. Bush emphasized the need for continued military engagement, strengthened homeland security, and the spread of democracy abroad. Domestically, he promoted making his earlier tax cuts permanent and expanding education reforms under No Child Left Behind. Democratic nominee John Kerry, running with John Edwards, criticized the Bush administration's handling of Iraq, particularly the failure to find weapons of mass destruction and the costs of prolonged conflict. Kerry argued for a more multilateral foreign policy, rebuilding alliances, and focusing more attention on Afghanistan. He also emphasized healthcare reform, deficit reduction, and addressing economic inequality. Social issues, such as same-sex marriage, cultural values, and the role of religion in politics, played unusually large roles, reflecting rising polarization. Ultimately, fears about terrorism and support for Bush's wartime leadership helped him secure re-election. George W. Bush won both the Electoral College and the popular vote, solidifying his second term. 2008, Barack Obama versus John McCain. The 2008 presidential election took place amid the global financial crisis, collapsing banks, rising unemployment, and deep frustration with the outgoing Bush administration. Democratic nominee Barack Obama, running with Joe Biden, centered his campaign on economic recovery, government intervention to stabilize financial markets, and support for working and middle-class families. Obama also emphasized ending the Iraq War, refocusing on Afghanistan, and shifting U.S. foreign policy toward diplomacy and multilateral cooperation. His message of hope and change energized younger voters, minorities, and suburban professionals, forming a broad new Democratic coalition. Republican nominee John McCain, with running mate Sarah Palin, positioned himself as an experienced national security leader capable of navigating international threats. However, McCain faced the challenge of distancing himself from the unpopular Bush administration while defending core Republican positions such as limited government and tax reduction. He advocated for targeted economic measures, but opposed large-scale government intervention. Cultural and generational contrasts also shaped the race. Obama represented a youthful, diverse, technology-driven movement, while McCain appealed to traditional conservatives and older voters. Ultimately, economic turmoil and Obama's expansive coalition helped deliver a decisive victory. Barack Obama won the presidency, becoming the first African American to hold the office. 2012, Barack Obama versus Mitt Romney. The 2012 presidential election centered on the slow recovery from the Great Recession, debates over healthcare reform, and contrasting visions for the future of the American economy. Incumbent President Barack Obama, with Vice President Joe Biden, argued that his administration had prevented a deeper collapse through the stimulus bill, the auto industry rescue, and new financial regulations. He highlighted the Affordable Care Act, ACA, as a major achievement aimed at expanding healthcare coverage and reducing long-term costs. Obama framed the race around protecting the middle class, raising taxes on the wealthy, and supporting social programs that he said were essential to economic fairness. Republican nominee Mitt Romney, running with Paul Ryan, focused on deficit reduction, entitlement reform, and private sector experience. Romney argued that Obama's policies had slowed job creation and increased government dependency. He proposed lowering taxes, cutting regulations, and restructuring Medicare for future retirees. The campaign also featured debates over foreign policy, including the Benghazi attack and America's role abroad. Cultural and demographic shifts were evident, as Obama solidified support among young voters, minorities, and suburban women. In the end, Barack Obama won re-election, carrying both the popular vote and the Electoral College. 2016, Donald Trump versus Hillary Clinton. The 2016 presidential election became one of the most polarizing and unpredictable races in modern American politics. Republican nominee Donald Trump, running with Mike Pence, centered his campaign on economic nationalism, immigration restriction, and skepticism toward globalization. Trump attacked trade agreements like NAFTA and the Trans-Pacific Partnership, arguing they harmed American workers and contributed to manufacturing decline. He emphasized border security, proposed building a wall on the U.S.-Mexico border, and adopted a combative outsider persona that resonated with many white working-class and rural voters. Democratic nominee Hillary Clinton, running with Tim Kaine, focused on expanding economic opportunity, preserving the Affordable Care Act, addressing student debt, and promoting social equality. She supported incremental immigration reform, a path to citizenship, and continued U.S. leadership abroad. Major issues included the handling of her private email server, concerns over political establishment fatigue, and debates on national security following global terrorism incidents. The campaign also unfolded amid rising cultural polarization and heavy social media influence. Despite polls favoring Clinton, Trump flipped key Rust Belt states, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, while energizing a populist movement. Donald Trump won the presidency, though he lost the national popular vote. 2020, Joe Biden versus Donald Trump. The 2020 presidential election unfolded during an extraordinary national crisis defined by the COVID-19 pandemic, mass unemployment, nationwide protests over racial justice, and deep political polarization. Democratic nominee Joe Biden, running with Kamala Harris, centered his campaign on restoring stability, strengthening public health leadership, and rebuilding the economy through large federal stimulus efforts. Biden emphasized expanding access to healthcare, supporting science-based pandemic policy, and undoing key Trump-era regulatory and environmental rollbacks. His message focused on unity, institutional trust, and a return to more traditional governance. Incumbent President Donald Trump, with Vice President Mike Pence, campaigned on rapid economic reopening, deregulation, and vaccine development under Operation Warp Speed. Trump criticized lockdowns, warned against rising socialism, and highlighted pre-pandemic economic growth. Immigration, policing, and civil unrest were also dominant issues, as Trump appealed to law and order voters and suburban conservatives. Mail-in voting surged to historic levels, generating intense legal battles and accusations of fraud from Trump, despite courts rejecting such claims. Tensions exploded on January 6, 2021, when a pro-Trump mob stormed the U.S. Capitol in an attempt to disrupt Congress's electoral vote count. Ultimately, Joe Biden won the presidency, securing both the popular vote and the Electoral College. 2024, Donald Trump versus Kamala Harris. The 2024 presidential election took place amid economic turbulence, immigration debates, a climate policy crossroads, and broader concerns about democratic norms. Initially, incumbent President Joe Biden announced his re-election bid, but after a widely criticized debate performance and internal party pressure, he withdrew from the race on July 21st, becoming the first sitting president to do so mid-cycle. Biden then endorsed his vice president Kamala Harris, who became the Democratic nominee, and selected Minnesota Governor Tim Walz as her running mate. Harris campaigned on defending abortion rights, investing in clean energy infrastructure, strengthening social safety nets and U.S. alliances, and tackling rising living costs. Former President Donald Trump, running with J.D. Vance, campaigned on reversing Biden's economic and immigration policies, promising aggressive border enforcement, mass deportations, and major tariff-based economic restructuring. Trump argued that rising prices, global instability, and immigration surges demanded a dramatic policy shift. Cultural issues such as transgender rights, crime perceptions, and school curriculum debates also played a major role. With voters deeply divided, the election underscored shifting coalitions and the growing influence of working class, Latino, and younger voters in key states. Donald Trump won the presidency, marking his return to office and shaping a new chapter in American politics.